Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where this week I'm working on a project for the On30 Goldfield and Calico model railroad. As you may recall, this is the layout that I spun off from the Thunder Mesa Mining Company. It exists just across the aisle, and the theme is sort of Knott's Berry Farm meets the Southern Pacific Narrow Gauge somewhere in the Mojave Desert around 1920 or so. And the main thing I really want to get done this week is the backdrop. As you can see, I have about half a backdrop built. I've got backdrop behind Calico Mountain, but nothing here behind the town of Calico itself. But I want to tell you right up front, this is not a video about backdrop painting. I've done those in the past, and I'll put a link to them. No, this is a video about reinstalling an old backdrop that's already been painted. Back when I was disassembling the original Thunder Mesa layout, I took out a large section of backdrop, about 4 by 8 feet, and stored it away. That was the section that connects directly to this one behind Calico Mountain. And it's been sitting in storage all this time, waiting for the day that I would get around to reinstalling it. Well, my friends, the day is here. The only problem is that this backdrop is just too darn big. It's about 3 feet too long and about 4 or 5 inches too tall. So I need to cut it down. And unfortunately, I have neither the space nor the proper tools to do that here in the studio, which means I've got to load the whole thing into the back of my van, drive it down the hill to my garage, and do the work there. For this to fit on the new layout, I need it to be about 60 inches long rather than the 96 it is now. So I've drawn a line right here. I'm going to cut off this 3 feet of the backdrop. Got to cut right through the frame here and then go straight down through this masonite as straight as I can. Then trim off the bottom about 4 inches or so. Reframe the whole thing, at least in the parts where I cut it off, and reinstall it. How hard can it be? All right, we've got our backdrop panel cut down to the proper dimensions now, and I think I can do the rest of the work on this up here at the studio. The next thing that needs to happen is I need to cut a hole down here near the bottom for the track to pass through as it enters the backstage staging area. There's already a hole down in this corner from the old layout, but unfortunately it's not in the right place for where I need it to be now. Now, to make this job a little bit easier, I have a template that I created some years ago out of some foam core for an On30 tunnel portal. So I just need to line that up where it needs to be, measure in from the side here, and then trace it onto the backdrop, and then I can cut it out. One thing I just need to keep in mind is that since this is on a curve, I have to make sure there's enough space here for larger equipment like, say, passenger cars and things like that to swing out without hitting the edge of the tunnel. I flipped the backdrop panel over because I want to measure and then cut this from the back. So we're coming about 1 3/4 inches. Then I can trace this template on here. And the reason I'm cutting it from the back is because this thing is framed, and so there's really no way to like set it down flat on a table to cut it. And if it's, if it's up above a flat surface, this masonite is going to flap all over the place while I try to cut it and probably do some damage to the board. I'll cut this a little bit more generous than it needs to be, just to be on the safe side. Okay, now for the fun part. I'm going to lift this up, clamp it into position, and see how we did with the fit. See if a passenger car can pass through here. No trouble. And that looks pretty good. Now I can add some additional 1x2 bracing, starting with this corner right here. I'm going to clamp this, but I'm going to use some cardboard on the painted side so I won't mar it. Basically using about every clamp I own on this, because this liquid nails works best when you clamp the hell out of it. I'm also continually checking the level on this to make sure it's, level. Now, as you can see, I purposefully cut the backdrop a little bit shorter by about 3/8 of an inch than it needed to be. And that was, just to have a little wiggle room. It's better to have it too short and then I can shim it upwards than to have it too long and, have to cut it again. Now the backdrop is not going to be permanently affixed to the layout deck. I'm just putting some cleats in here for alignment. It'll be held in with a few removable screws, and that way, if I ever need to move the layout, I'll be able to take the backdrop off and be able to get the whole thing through the door, which is always a concern. One of the most important things is to add some 45-degree angle bracing. Make sure this thing stays up at a 90-degree angle. Now I'm using a piece of scrap 1x2 to add a cleat to the front of this as well. That way it'll be a lot easier to align the backdrop if I ever need to take it off to move the layout. And all of this will be hidden behind scenery when all is said and done. That includes this old tunnel portal to nowhere. Yep, I'm back using drywall screws again. Sue me. Now I just need to add a few screws to secure these panels together. I can take these clamps off. Still need to let this liquid nails dry completely, but yeah, I don't think that's going anywhere. Standing back and looking at this now, I can see that I am going to have to touch up a few things and make a couple of changes to the backdrop. For one thing, you don't usually have a tunnel going into the clear blue sky. Just sketch in a new formation here. Kind of a stair-steppy, kind of rocky thing. Bring that over to about there. Now I said at the top that this wasn't going to be a video about backdrop painting, and that's still true, but I do want to touch this up just a little bit. Before I get any paints out, though, I want to pull these trains around back into the staging yard. I'll start by blocking in with some of my medium scenic base color where I want these new rock formations to be. Just following my pencil line that I made. Don't need to do much down in here because that's going to be covered with dimensional scenery and structures. I do want to fill this in over here though. Not sure exactly what the rocks are going to look like here. So I might as well paint it in. In the meantime, I do know that's going to be covered up though. Decided I want some distant looking Mojave Desert like hills back here. So I'm going to block those in with some apple barrel elephant gray. Using this cooler gray color is going to make these look further away, give it a little bit of atmospheric perspective. Now I want to come back over here with my lighter scenic base color. It's just a couple of shades lighter than this. Basically just a nice light tan. I'm going to start picking out the highlights and the edges here, always remembering where the light source is coming from. It's coming high and to the left. I like to use a small flat brush for this. Gives me lots of control. Flat, you can come in and make interesting rock-like shapes very easily. That's the brush I'm using right there. So I guess, yes, this is sort of a backdrop painting video after all. I'll pass on a few little tips and techniques here. You consider this a supplement to my other videos on painting backdrops. This is going back and fixing an existing backdrop or making it work with a new scene. Right now, still working in kind of the medium tones. Backdrop painting really is just landscape painting. It's, you know, you're painting a big landscape. And I always find it best to kind of start in the middle with the middle tones and then work my way towards the shadows and the highlights in, you know, both directions. That was a good idea to stand back and take a look every once in a while too. Come and do the same thing over here as well. Make sure this is going to blend in with the rocky scenery up in front of it. One thing I always try to remember when I'm doing backdrop painting like this is to use the imagination of the viewer to my advantage. And what that means is you don't have to get, you know, super detailed on everything. You know, most people know what rocks look like. They know what mountains look like. So if you can just indicate the basic shapes where the light is hitting, you're halfway there, because people's imagination is going to fill in the rest. Now I'm going to take that light tan, that light scenic base, and I'm going to make it even lighter by mixing it with some of this unbleached titanium. And here I'm mixing latex house paint with acrylic paint. You can do that. Works just fine. They're both plastic. It's hard to tell if you've got the right color until it dries, because acrylic and latex paints always dry a shade darker than they go on, but it just takes a little practice. Now I come back with that lighter shade and do basically the same thing again, going over what I just did, but not, you know, covering it completely, just hitting it here and there where I think the sun would be striking this this mountainside. Another little tip I can share with you is that, you know, when you get down towards the bottoms of these mountains, hills, formations, more sun, more light is going to be hitting down there because it's more parallel to the position of the sun. So that should usually be lighter, or larger blocks of lighter color, like I'm doing here, at least in the foreground. And of course this is true unless you know, it's very late in the afternoon, then you'd have a lot deeper shadows and less light hitting down on the horizontal surfaces. Now mix some of that raw sienna with a little bit of elephant gray to make a shadow color. So I'm going to come in here and carefully block in just here and there where I'd like the shadows to be a little bit deeper in those rocks. The thing about this kind of painting, you know, just you don't get in a hurry. And remember, if you mess up, you can always paint over it. Alright, I'm going to let all that dry for a few minutes, see where we're at. But while I wait, go back and finish up these distant hills with some country gray, lighter shade. Basically what I'm doing right here is I'm defining this with negative space. Art concept. Warning, art concept. See, I'm only coming down to right there. What that does is it makes it look like this part brings this forward, so that looks like it's in front of this back here, just by leaving that the darker shade. Just like I leave the little bits and holes in there, that looks like shadow then when you put the lighter tone next to it. I'm going to switch to a little smaller round brush so I can define these shapes a little bit better. And that's all this is, you know, I'm making little abstract shapes with triangles and lines and blocks of color using negative space to help define everything. And I want this to just kind of fade out down towards the bottom. See, like right here, this is this little triangle. I'll come down here and make a little line below it. A block right there. That's all there is to it. Great art teacher of mine once said that painting is just picking up color with your brush and putting it down in the right place. It's an oversimplification, but I take the point. I'm going to add another hill right here using negative space. Maybe this is a little ridge coming down. We'll connect these together. Now I'll mix just a little bit of white with that lighter gray for a highlight color. I don't want too much white. I don't want it to look like these mountains are, you know, snow-peaked. Don't want it to be too bright, because anything you add a bright color to, bright in value, I mean, like white, it's going to bring it forward, and these are supposed to be distant desert hills. Final thing is to add some desert plant life. For that, I'm just going to drop a couple of drops of Vallejo flat green in with some granite gray. So I want sort of a sage green. Let's see that color I'm mixing up there. I'm going to try and match pretty close to what I did on the backdrop here already. Very grayish, kind of sage green. And then I'm just going to dab it on. Don't have to paint a whole forest. This is the desert, but I want the look of, you know, sparse desert vegetation growing out here on the hillside. Okay, I think that'll do it. You know, for a video that wasn't supposed to be about backdrop painting, that was a lot of backdrop painting. Well, the backdrop sure does add a lot, doesn't it? We went from some plywood plains to a 100-mile view. And one of my favorite things about this is how this complements the Thunder Mesa layout, which is just across the aisle. Now, each layout acts as sort of a backdrop or background for the other. And the next project for the Goldfield and Calico, I think, is going to be this little bit of scenery back here at the back of the town, maybe that tunnel portal down there. But for now, that's going to wrap it up. I want to thank you all so much for watching today. If it's your first time here, I hope you will subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so YouTube will let you know when the next video is coming from Thunder Mesa Studio. You can also follow over on Instagram at thunder.mesa and see the resources available on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. As always, a huge shout out and thank you to our Patreon members who help to make these videos possible. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.